Hello everyone, and welcome to Blue Mondays, the GLORIO blog's Eureka 7 podcast. Now, I understand that we are up against some tough competition because recently other choices of podcast have advertised the availability of problematic women on their airwaves as well. So we are going to counter with the only thing we can, miserable old men.
Yes.
Speaking of miserable old men, I'm your host, Zigg. I am joined as always by Aqua.
The only thing we like more than problematic woman, miserable old man.
Indeed. And I am also joined by G.
I don't even know why I'm on this podcast. There is neither hide nor hair of an evil or problematic woman in these two episodes we're covering.
I mean, look, man, problematic women come in waves. You know, you just have to sit tight for a bit. You know, get drunk, and eventually the problematic women will flock around the antenna, and then you can drop your board on them. Wait, I think this metaphor got away from me at some point there.
You can't have too much of a good thing.
Indeed, yes. This week we are concentrating on episode 17, Sky Rock Gate, and episode 18, Ill Communication. An interesting pair of episodes that pair together pretty well here, I think. There's some themes and even some structural stuff that they share between them. So, without further ado, let's kick off with episode 17, Sky Rock Gate. I will say, to begin with, this is one of a handful of episodes for which the musical reference is not known. There's a couple of suggestions, but there is no definitive answer on this. So if anybody knows about a song or an album called Sky Rock Gate, put it in the comments, and maybe you'll become Eureka 7 famous. But
it just sounds like they made something up that might sound like something an artist in the 90s who was on way too much uppers could have thought up with. I don't know.
Possibly. I mean, the thing is that there have been so many songs over the history of music that you're almost guaranteed any sort of Mad Libs title will be a song somewhere, you know. So, but as far as I know, you know, I did a little digging myself and I checked all the normal places, but nobody can work out what this is a reference to. So you are spared the music quiz for this one, Aqua. We begin with the Gecko State in a rather tough spot, let's say. As you recall, last episode, the Gecko State had arrived at an abandoned trapar mine, FAC 51, to commence repairs. I've got to say, I missed a reference last episode. FAC 51 is the catalogue number of the famous Manchester club, the Hacienda. So that is also a musical reference that I should have noted there. Aqua, what were your first impressions of the opening of this episode?
It gave off immediate filler vibes because it seems like it's the comedy budgeting episode. You know, they set it up as if this is the episode where the gang tries all sorts of schemes to get money, and Hap is going to be the one who's like, no, we can't do that. We don't have the money for that. But over the past couple of episodes, Eureka 7 has been pretty good at setting up episodes as sort of like throwaway, quote-unquote, filler sort of misadventures that do eventually culminate in something more substantial, right?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You know, the first third of this episode, say, is fairly boilerplate and kind of not great, to be honest. But I think it definitely develops into something interesting and meaningful as we go along. G, do you have any thoughts about how this episode kicks off?
This is definitely one of those episodes that I think I have like no recollection of, right? Like this is like kind of in that middle period between the beginning of Eureka 7, so to speak, and let's just say the next major plot inflection, right?
Yeah, it's between those like big signposts of plot that you remember in a show.
Right. But yeah, I do think that like, especially taken as part of the, again, you know, as we've said multiple times, right? It's like you almost come to appreciate this kind of style of pacing and storytelling more as it becomes more rare in modern anime production. I think there's a good bit of more incidental style like character building in this episode.
Absolutely,
right? Like,
yes.
like not only like, I mean, because like this episode is kind of, for better or worse, kind of split into kind of an A plot and a B plot, right?
Mhm.
You have the A
Yes.
plot, which is the boys are gotta go get some more. I forget what it's called, right? But the film, the plating for
transparency film, I think it's called.
Right, exactly, because they need that to fly.
Yeah.
That's the thing they've been trying to repair this whole time, right? And then you have like the much like smaller kind of B plot, right, which is everybody who's kind of stayed behind at base, right, which is mostly the ladies, though Holland is there too, kind of getting into like that in many ways, right, that this is a bit of a like weird holding pattern, right, for the Gecko state, right, and that maybe that like obviously they are stranded here. They do need to fix the Gecko, but there is a little bit of like, is that just a pretense to like mope in a cave for a couple of weeks?
Right.
Which, to be clear, I get it, man. I would love to mope in a cave for a couple of weeks sometimes.
Wouldn't we all? Yeah, I mean, it's a good example of the sort of theme and atmosphere of the episode paralleling. Ooh, that's a mouthful. Paralleling the mechanical development of the plot, right? The Gecko state are kind of stranded and at a loose end, and so the characters are kind of stranded and at a loose end in their development, their relationships there. Like you, G, I didn't really remember this episode to begin with. I remember it quite clearly later on, but the opening of this episode, I think, gave me real bad vibes for a moment, because I was like, oh no, is this like a shitty boys versus girls episode?
I mean, I kind of have to agree with you there. I think I'll just come out of the gate and I think this is one of the weakest episodes so far.
Sure.
Because of this whole, like, not necessarily because of the contents of the episode, but more of like the thematic through line they try to set up with this, which indeed has to do with the splitting the cast into the boys and the girls. And a lot of the framework of the episode seems to be about, boys will be boys and girls will be girls, right? Renton sort of has to learn and experience, the guys are just guys, and sometimes guys are grumpy, and sometimes guys are antisocial, and sometimes guys are dumb, but what are you going to do about it? Whereas...
in my notes here, there is more than one instance of the phrase "guys being dudes." So yes, I think I would agree with you on that one.
Whereas on the other hand, Eureka's B plot is more like, girls gotta stand up, and they gotta, when they're feeling bad, they can't show their emotions. They always need to be there for the children who depend on them. They gotta, tolerate the man being who he is, and suck it up and grin and bear it. And that whole thing just feels kind of dated to me.
I think that there are definitely some weird sexist overtones in parts of this episode, but I'm going to push back against the idea that the Eureka plot is kind of playing into those cliches, because I think it's a little more nuanced than that. But I think that's something we'll get into as we go through. Like, I will say, I don't think this is the greatest opening, because there's some fairly corny women do be shopping jokes.
Women be shopping,
yeah, which I mean, there's like not egregious, but not great either.
There's also the whole like Hap being like, "Oh, did you push her down? Is that why she's angry?" Dude,
that's the other thing as
not
well.
very appropriate.
Like, if I'm trying to be more generous to this episode, I mean, I think what we're kind of seeing here is like, I think this is like the first time Renton has actually like experienced any like male companionship with the Gecko state, like really up to this point, unless you count his like, weird adoration of doggy Nissan.
Right?
Yeah. Like this is like the first time he's actually been able to like hang out with the other men of the Gecko state to any like capacity. And we can get into it later, but I do think like even with like the Eureka plot line, I don't think it's necessarily so much like, and this is how a woman should behave, as much as it is like, I mean, it's a thing of like Hilda is like in many ways probably the most traditionally feminine of
she does
the,
the
like,
mom. She does all the mom stuff at Gecko State,
Right,
right? Sort of
right,
the
you know,
shopping and the laundry.
she is the mother hen, right? She is,
Yeah.
you know, she is constantly like wrangling Matthew along with the rest of the crew, right? She is the most responsible. She handles the shopping. She literally does be, you know, she literally be shopping, but unlike the shitty stereotype, she is like fist fighting women in the grocery
Yes.
store for
Still a great
clearance sale paper towels, right?
Yeah.
So-
I think
and I
that-
think what I was getting into there. Sorry, let
No,
me
go
just
for it.
finish this. It's just what she's kind of bringing up more to like Eureka. I think is the more nuanced, like, who are you actually resentful towards in this situation, right? Is it Renton or the Nervash, right? Like, and
Mhm.
I think it's like more about like once you come to terms with who is the actual like target of your ire, the more honest you can be with yourself and like move forward emotionally, right?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely how I took the Hilda scene. I really like the Hilda scene actually because it is just a great example of someone being emotionally honest and giving Eureka good advice, really, you know.
Mhm.
And the other thing is, you know, we talk about how Hilda is the most traditionally feminine of the cast, but also she's still like we have seen her kicking ass and blowing dudes up plenty of times, you know.
Or I
so-
mean,
yeah.
it's a weird thing because you know it's like I said that and then I instantly realized, oh wait, but she's also like the only like female pilot, right?
Yes.
Or
So-
an LFO pilot. So.
Yeah. So it's kind of a no balance. I will say that I think at least some of the male bonding machismo stuff here is definitely there for parody, if that makes
Oh.
sense. Like Hap picking his nose and flicking his booger at Renton is definitely a joke.
Right. I mean, it's absolutely sort of in the end of the episode. Seems to be, you know, when the guys are getting drunk in order to attract
Yeah.
the skyfish, and Renton is off on his own, and his conclusion is basically, oh, let them do their thing. I
Yeah.
will do my thing. You know, I will learn from these guys what I think is useful for me, but that doesn't mean I have to be exactly like them. Right.
Yeah, which is, you know, a surprisingly mature outlook for Renton. I will say there's one bit in this opening scene which that I really like, which is where Renton reveals that he doesn't know what autumn is,
Yeah.
which is like a nice little bit
Yes.
of world building through believable dialogue, right?
I mean, that line has implications, right? Because Hap also doesn't know what autumn is. So it's
Yeah.
like seasons don't exist in this universe, which
Seemingly not.
gives me the impression that we're maybe dealing with some sort of like post apocalyptic, like as in at some point in the history of the world there was a large environmental disaster that created the world as it is.
It's possible. It's also possible that we're just on a planet that doesn't have seasons,
Right.
right? Like
Well,
because
but then it would be weird that there would
But
be
then,
an
but they still the
expression
point, right?
that
the point is
refers
that
to
they
autumn, right?
they have
Right.
a word for autumn, but they don't
Yeah.
know what it
Mhm.
is. So
Yeah.
I think the implication is yes. That I mean, look, we have seen enough of like the Seven Swell effect and the Corallians to know that like this world has been altered and is in the process of being altered, right?
I mean, which is
it-
also
it's not a
some-
world which resembles our contemporary Earth by any standards.
So they
there,
do have
you
the
know?
Japanese yen.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, but
But I mean, the whole fact that the world has changed is something that Dewey also refers to in his speech at the end of the episode.
Yes,
Right?
and you know, I just think this is a nice little. It's a little on the nose, you know. I'm not saying it's subtle, but it's believable enough that the dialogue doesn't immediately leap out at you with flashing red lights
Mhm.
there. I think that Renton is beginning to display more self-awareness, right? He's beginning to become a little bit more emotionally intelligent. He knows things are going wrong. He knows when things started to go wrong. He just doesn't really know what to do about it.
Mhm.
Right.
I mean, he shows a lot of different little moments of maturity in these episodes, right? He has started to learn not to blindly idolize the Gecko State guys and follow everything they say. He knows to take some things with a grain of salt, or be like, are you sure about that, or is that real? Like, even towards Eureka, he is no longer the desperate sort of whipping boy to her that he was in the earliest episodes. He knows how to that he sometimes needs to keep his distance. And he can still be very happy if he is quote unquote rewarded, but he doesn't seem to be chomping at the bit anymore as much as he used to. He seems to start seeing Eureka as a human being rather than a sort of idealized Madonna. I think trophy is not the right word, but a sort of ideal to. The same way you would study hard to get good grades, you would try to win at manhood, and she would be the reward.
Yeah, he understands that perhaps barging in and smothering her is not the best thing he can do under the circumstances, right? Which certainly shows a level of emotional maturity that he didn't have here at the beginning. I think that, as I said before, I really do like the scene with Eureka and Hilda, because I think there's some cute stuff with the kids and Hilda, like teaching them to fold the socks and stuff. That's just the kind of like little fun, cute interaction that adds some warmth to your character relationships there. But also just, Hilda is a very straight-talking, straightforward character. She's among the more well-adjusted characters in the Gecko State, I think it's fair to say. And just seeing her lay it down straight and talk to Eureka like she's a regular girl is refreshing. I think it's clear that Eureka doesn't quite understand what she's going for, but she's making an honest, good faith attempt to explain or try and push her on the right direction, and I like that from her.
What I do also like is the sort of the different reactions that the two have to Mater is the girl, right?
Yes.
Being a bit annoying, right? Like Eureka lashes out towards her.
That doesn't happen until next episode.
Is that next episode?
That's next episode, yes.
No. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
It's easy to confuse because it is in quite a similar situation,
yes,
but that is not until next episode, yes. But yes, like I said at the beginning, these two episodes kind of mirror each other in that way. We also loop back around to the Holland Talho drama, which we've been away from for quite a few episodes now, but we get a little hint that things are not entirely settled there, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank God we have Talho here to be the voice of reason.
Yeah, it's hard not to side with her here. I mean, the extent of their relationship issue is still not fully apparent.
Right.
We also do get a fun little bit of foreshadowing here where they talk about they can hear someone still mining in the mine.
Right. Yes. I do like that scene because to speak to what you guys are talking about. I do think, like, as much as Talho, like, initially gets introduced as this very bratty, emotionally immature, like, kind of character, especially the ways in which she bullies Renton early on. I do think it's, like, these scenes where she is alone with Holland, it does kind of, like, signal to you that, in many ways, right, that, like, Talho is much more, like, emotionally cognizant than she lets on. Right,
in many ways, she's the more mature of the two of them, right? Despite the outward appearance, she's the one who wants to face the past. Holland is the one who is running away from the past.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what it's like to be brat, you party hard, but you also, reckon with the demons of your past in an emotionally mature way, and also you flip the bird at everyone. That is being brat.
Yes. But again, this is just like good long-term storytelling, right? Like we had sort of a big moment for this relationship early on. It's been on the back burner for a bit. We're turning it up slowly again here. There's a little bit more in the next episode as well. Just sort of to remind the audience it exists, to sort of bring it to the forefront where eventually, spoiler alert, but we will get more episodes focused on this. So it's just kind of like a good way to remind the audience that this drama is still happening in the background.
It is just a show that is so good at letting certain plot points simmer while others develop, and then it can get right back to them before you forget that, there was something going on that front, right? And that is really how this show uses its 50 episodes to its advantage.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just a thing like speaking of the other podcast, the kind of thing that we praise a show like the Apothecary Diaries for, it is simply, you notice how you just can use so many different writing mechanics and storytelling techniques that simply become unavailable to you when you're limited to that 12 episode one core paradigm that most modern anime are stuck in, right?
Right, absolutely. And, this entire episode is an example of that. Arguably, both of these are, because if you were under a harsh episode count, you would probably cut both of these fairly fast.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Neither of these episodes exist, even in a 26 episode Eureka 7.
Yeah.
Probably not, but I think they both add something of real value, honestly.
I definitely think so, yeah. I mean, hell, we get a little bit of even Kengo this episode, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
This mustachioed member of Gecko State.
Yeah, it's a good episode for Kengo, actually. He kind of takes the lead on the plot stuff. So, I mean, really, we move on to the meat of the episode here, which is where they arrive at the guy Kengo says can help them with the transparency film. And what they find is a mostly busted up house and a really drunk dude.
Sure is good that the leading expert in film that covers airships lives on walking distance from the place where they crashed.
Well, it's not walking
there,
distance,
but yes.
Also, I guess they drove there in the mechs. That's true. Yeah.
One detail I do like in these two episodes is that they're driving everywhere, presumably because it's much more efficient and lower cost than flying everywhere.
Save
right?
your fuel.
Yeah, I think that's a neat little detail there. In general, I don't remember the show using the car mode of the mechas this much, and I'm delighted that they are, honestly, because it's just such a weird thing that I'm into it. But yes,
hey, if you have a cool vehicle, you'd better use it, right? Yes. Writers of Kamen Rider.
We do discover that this dude is not, in fact, the film engineer that Kengo was looking for. That dude is dead. This is that dude's son. And
I like how that dude is just straight up dead. Like, you'd think there'd be a twist of like, oh, he disappeared or he's secretly still there. He's just dead.
Well, there is kind of a twist because they do mention how he died. Did you catch that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they mentioned that he died of desperation disease.
Right, desperation disease was mentioned. Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Which again, just to remind us, we do get a brief flashback of the girl in the hospital that Renton saw, but it's only an incidental detail. But again, it's another one of those just little nudges to remind you this is still a thing. This is something, pay attention. This will become important there. There's a couple of other neat details here. Renton really disapproves of Neil day drinking, which again is just an example of just what a sheltered, sweet child he is, honestly.
Yes. I mean, yes, but it might also imply a thing or two about Axel. I don't know.
I mean, I think the thing I always take away from Renton expressing, a very straight-laced view in things like this is that he is really naive about the way the world works and the way people actually
Besides, I think the tone with which Renton speaks of his grandpa in the next episode, I think tells us that for the most part, I think Renton has a mostly approving view of his grandfather.
And,
so
that's an interesting point, which we will come to in a bit. But the other detail I really like is that Kengo remembers Neil's name, and Neil is surprised that he remembers his name.
Right.
Which is just kind of like a nice insight into the different worldview that these two characters have.
Right. I mean, Kengo doesn't get a ton of screen time across all of Eureka 7, but he definitely in many ways. I sometimes even speak of Kengo as if he is a very Arakawa coded character, sort of straight laced.
He kind of is. Yeah, he sort of embodies the the old style father knows best kind of.
He's a Showa era man.
Yeah, he's an old fashioned kind of fellow.
Yeah. There's some implication that he was a professional soldier, which kind of fits in, right? He's very much the reliable one in the
right, exactly. And the ways in which those traits can portray themselves, positively, right? At least here in this episode, right, which is his no nonsense, on your feet soldier kind of tone, right? He is a straight shooter.
I think it's interesting because, if you look at it at a glance, it seems like all the men in Gecko State are bad examples for Renton. You know,
Yes.
like the younger guys are slackers. They're sort of like pervert assholes. Kengo is this sort of like brusque guy who slaps people around to get them to do what they want. Holland is a coward. Let's say it like that.
Holland
But
is Holland.
yeah, it just sort of shows that, you know, these archetypes that the guys represent have their bad sides that can have a detrimental effect on how they raise the people around them, but they also have their good sides, you know.
Yeah, that's the thing I was going to say. I wouldn't necessarily say that the male characters in Gecko State are like bad role models for Renton. They are bad role models in some regards,
Mhm.
but that's because they are three-dimensional characters who have both good points and bad points, right? Like,
And to be clear, like Kengo does spur this dude back into action, right?
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah,
actually,
yeah.
one thing I do want to point out that I definitely did not catch as a kid, is Kengo open hand slaps Neil. So he open hand slaps an adult man,
yes.
which is, as we know, something Holland does not do even with Holland closes his fist even with children,
Yes.
right? Like there is like, not to say that any type of like physical harm is like good or justified, but I do want to make that distinction, right? That even when dealing with
where does it rank
adults,
on the Holland scale of beating children?
right? Like Kengo is still like, I'm not going to hit this man. I mean, he is hitting him, but you know, look, we all know like the social connotation, the difference between a punch and a slap, right?
It's very clearly intended to galvanize him rather than like genuinely harm him. You know?
Right.
Yes, exactly.
It's a slap to shame him, a slap to kind of like remind him of his place almost. And I think, you know, it's a little difficult because I do think that there are perhaps some slight overtones of the classic Japanese, oh, you must continue the family business, you mustn't shame your parents, you must get back to the thing that, you know, that your family has always done. But also, you know, the flip side is clearly without that work, he has become a drunken catastrophe of a human being.
Right.
And, you know, Kengo is clearly here to... I think it's a good showcase for Kengo, particularly because he realizes he has a job, right? He has to get this dude up and about so they can get what they need. But at the same time, he's doing it to get this guy back in the game, right? To kind of to straighten him up. So,
and also, I think what saves it is sort of the ending where Neil is like, you know, it was good for me to do this, but I'm still quitting. You know, there is no future in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you know, we'll talk about that when we get to it. But I think that does do a lot to kind of add a great deal of strength of emotion to this arc here. But yes, sorry, G, you were going to say.
Oh no, don't worry. I was actually transitioning to the next part, which is I was just going to say. Well, we find out that maybe day drinking, maybe the transition from film engineer to day drinker is not as great of a leap as we thought, because it turns out day drinking may be part of the job description.
Yes,
job,
this is delightfully weird, and I really like it. So it turns out that for transparency film, they need to harvest skyfish, right?
Yes.
And it turns out that the way to harvest skyfish is to stick a compact drive nearby and then party it up, and the skyfish are supposedly attracted to people who are having fun.
Right, to positive emotions.
Yeah, I really like this because it is so old wives' tale coded. You know what? It's
so corny.
It is exactly the kind of thing that somebody doing this business
it is exactly the kind of thing your boomer uncle would say brings the fish, you know, when you're like out fishing or something.
But like also anybody who's in like a long obsolete trade, like, I don't know, the classic Japanese example is sword making, right? But like you know, just a business that these days is built more on emotion and tradition than any actual need for efficiency. You know, and I like that the show doesn't actually really confirm whether this is true or false. It sort of leans towards true, but
but still, the implication is more like that the skyfish are attracted to Renton's sort of genuine feelings
emotion,
of bliss
yes.
when thinking of Eureka rather than the partying and
Yes.
being rowdy.
Well,
that
I think
the dudes are
there's a
doing.
good subtext there, right? Which is that the partying is hollow, right? Like
Yeah.
Neil puts on some shitty music and they all start drinking, which, to be fair, is a real guys being dudes kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Again, this
Like-
I wrote guys being dudes here.
You know,
Stoner
like, there's the
hates
part
big
where-
band music, apparently.
Yeah, you know, there's like
I mean,
the
that
whole
is-
bit where God, what's his,
Moondoggy?
Doggy Nissan, Moondoggy, right? Like starts like doing stupid impressions, and it just kills the vibe entirely.
Also, it turns out he's only been drinking oolong tea, but he's still
Yeah.
acting super drunk.
I mean, classic anime trope right
Yes.
there.
Yeah. But yes, they're so, like, there's a lot of comedy from them trying so hard to be happy and carefree when really they're all kind of annoyed and depressed and miserable, but they're just day drinking and trying hard to live it up. Couple of things I want to note here. Neil mounts his compact drive on a big old hook, which looks a little familiar to some of the things we've seen dotted around the landscape throughout this show, huh?
I didn't notice that. I
yes.
mostly was just thinking about the pirate girl from Guilty Gear who fights with the big anchor.
Mai.
Yeah, that's what it reminds me
That thing's
of.
not nearly large enough,
Yes,
but I
not
see what you
hefty
mean.
enough. But yes, this kind of staff that he's carrying looks exactly like the big piles that have been driven into the ground. We've seen them in various different settlements. We see one in the next episode as well. So that's just something that's notable there, so to speak. I think that this scene Gidget has with Eureka is a little bit less good, you know, because she's not as good a character as Hilda is, basically. But
Yeah,
this one does come a little bit closer to, you know, smile even if you're feeling bad inside.
Right.
But it's still sweet, you know. I think
they should have just switched these scenes around, right? They should have had Gidget first, then Hilda.
Probably yes, but you know, I think that they both have a there's a little bit of sparkle to them, you know, even this more basic one that I think does touch the heart a little.
I think, like, again, if I'm trying to be like a little bit more fair here, I don't think Gidget is doing the like a woman should smile more as much as it is that like as the adult in the room. You know, I mean, who amongst us has not like experienced this as children, right? Of like realizing, oh, your parents are like trying their best to maintain like a facade of normalcy, even when things are clearly going wrong. You know, like it's a thing of like you think back, oh God, 20 years ago that one dinner, that's because my parents. The house was getting remortgaged. That's why they were like, you know, whatever, you know, stuff like that, right? And realizing, oh, what they were trying to do was pretend everything was fine, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a little closer to maybe what Gidget is expressing here is like, you did take on the responsibility of caring for 3 children, and you know, for better or worse, right? Like these kids are not going to have the emotional maturity to understand that mom's going through a rough patch.
Yeah, and also I think that the advice of, you know, you have to smile through your tough times, you have to be upbeat even if you're not feeling 100%, hits a little differently because obviously Eureka is not a normal person with a fully developed emotional range, right? She is in many ways naive about the way humans express emotion, so it's not necessarily as condescending as it seems to say that to her. But yeah, we're kind of getting into the episode wrap up here. You know, we get Renton getting owned by Skyfish because he's not that good a pilot yet. We get Eureka being able to contact him psychically, seemingly through their joint connection to the nerve ash, which is just kind of something that's left in the air.
I mean, this is one of those, like, are we supposed to take this literally, or is this more like, oh, he thinks of Eureka and she thinks of him? Like,
I think it's up to personal interpretation.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it's necessarily important. It's more just to kind of like bring our 2 characters and their 2 emotional journeys through this episode together there. let's stick with this plot line for now, because the other stuff we can talk about at the end. But I think that there's a couple of important things that happen at the end here. There's firstly, Renton notes that Neil reminds him of his grandfather, right, which is an interesting comparison. One of the first times Renton has made like an explicit emotional connection to his grandfather there.
It is interesting, right? Like the connecting line between these two episodes, right? Where it's like, it's both episodes about working men, and how much that is specifically evokes.
Yes, and in many ways, this episode is it's effective on its own, but it works especially well as kind of like a tee up for next episode, which is kind of this episode, but played with higher stakes almost,
Right.
And I think that, I think also they share this sort of downbeat ending, which is that, as you said earlier, Neil is happy that he was able to do it one more time, but one big order does not a business make. He's happy that he could go out on a high note, but he's still going out. It's not happening. The miracle business revival is not happening.
There is a sense where I think there's like this sense of, if not economic depression throughout Eureka 7, but this sort of like changing of the guard, right? A generational shift from like one to the next, and how that affects certain industries, certain crafts, right? Like we especially get into that next episode, right? With like, Renton's grandfather, with the person Renton meets in the next episode. Yes. Like this idea that almost like the melancholy, like bittersweetness of like modernization, right? Yeah. Like we're entering this fancy new era, and there's all these things we just won't need anymore, and how that's a shame, for a lot of those people, right?
I think it's even more explicit than that. I think it's like the planet's dying, Cloud. Like,
yes. I mean, look, I don't want to like get too into it, but yes, there's certainly that.
I mean, I don't necessarily think it's literal, but I'm with Aqua on this one. Is that it's less that kind of like, and generational transference is part of the overriding theme of the show. You can tell that from episode 1, but it does feel like that this world is sort of fading away almost. I mean, like between the increased military presence, the environmental disasters, and just sort of like the increasing grip of the military, the desperation disease. Right. It does kind of feel like the world is rotting.
I mean, Dewey makes it explicit in his chat, in his speech, right? Am I right, chat? We need to take the world back,
Yeah. So let's pivot to that. I mean, this isn't the ending scene, but like it's a scene at the end, which is we have Dewey assembling his. Let's be honest, he's Hitler Youth Division here.
The conclave of Dominics has gathered to elect a Luke soon.
Yes. This is classic. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say this scene is very, very like overtly totalitarian coded, right? Like you have this cadre of young men eager to be indoctrinated by their leader. You have Dewey giving this very new age speech, right? Like, this kind of, we will take back control. We will, dominate. We don't have to do anything with the sages, fuck their stupid plan.
We will return.
It is that.
Very generalissimo coded, right? And of course, in the historical context of Japan as a nation, right? Like the subtext of the military deciding that it should decide political matters, very real context there, right?
Yeah,
of course.
Absolutely. But I think that I don't necessarily want to say that's wrong. It's obviously right, but there's also kind of like a sort of an even more sort of crazed vision here, which is kind of like it's a higher purpose thing, right? It's a kind of like our mission, our destiny stuff.
That is archetypical for fascism, right? Fascists never have like concrete goals. It's always, we go back to the glorious past. We will save the world. We will return things to the way they used to be.
Right. Yeah. But what I'm trying to convey is that like this is not just a political power takeover.
Mhm.
Like it is a new world order vision, and it's got all the trappings, all the white and gleaming steel and all the very kind of like the coded colors and all that kind of stuff.
Stabbing a stack of papers with a knife.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of notes. The stack of paper says Swallowtail plan on it. It is presumably a plan that the three sages have approved that Dewey does not think much of, because he says they don't know about this and I'm not going to do it anyway. So, some real sort of laying the ground for Dewey to become more involved in our ongoing plot.
I've always thought that stabbing a stack of papers like that would be really hard, right? Because like when you got so many layers of paper, like I mean, look, man,
tough.
Jotaro was able to tank Dio's knives with issues of Shonen Jump, right? So you think you could easily stab a knife through a thick ass paper report like that?
Maybe Dewey just keeps his knives sharper than Dio does.
Yeah.
You have the sharpest Japanese steel folded 10,000 times.
Yes. But like this scene is also kind of like, as much as it's a message to his troops, it's also kind of a message to the audience, right? Like this shit is about to get real. We are about to insert ourselves into the story in a fairly major way there, and we do end. We don't end right there. We do end on one tiny little scene, of Eureka trying her best to be a little more upbeat. Of trying her best to reach out to Renton a little more, and that's kind of a sweet way to end an episode that's kind of surprisingly wistful, right? Surprisingly emotional. Has a little bit of heart behind some of its bluster.
Now that's it. If this relationship ain't the fucking epitome of one step forward, one step back, though.
One step forward, 10 steps back.
Yes, as we will maybe get into in this next episode.
So let's move on to episode 18, Ill Communication. Aqua, last week we gave you a layup with Bjork. Let's have another layup here, Ill Communication.
Yeah, this is, of course, a reference to the Beastie Boys album. Probably one of the most famous Beastie Boy albums, aside from the first one.
I mean, like I would say, it's less famous than Paul's Boutique.
Paul's Boutique Boutique as well.
But yes, this is this the first time we've had an episode that's explicitly named after an album rather than a song?
I think so.
Yeah. In any case, this is the fourth Beastie Boys album, Ill Communication, which was released on May the 31st, 1994. It was a US #1 on the Hot 100. Probably most famous for including arguably the signature Beastie Boys song Sabotage, which was the first single from the album there. Also
beloved by idol groups all over Japan.
Yes, also by Starfleet. But this we have of course we have of course already had an ongoing Beastie Boys reference throughout the show, because Renton's father is named after band member Adam Horowitz, aka Adrock.
Yes.
Although he spells it AD-ROCK there. But yes, Beastie Boys, great group. Listen to their music. But we kicked this episode off. I want to mention this because I just like stuff like this. We just kicked this episode off with some fun, weird world mechanical stuff, right? They're building these massive transparency film wings, planes, whatever, and it just looks neat. It's just cool.
Apparently have to glue on the way you would paper a wall.
I think the implication is that they're layering the films so that they form a rigid structure which they can then attach to the wings or something like that. It's not entirely clear. It just looks neat.
What I do also like is everyone has to wear, these big hazmat suits and these mouth masks.
Yes.
Except Kengo, because of his mustache, the regular mouth mask that everyone is wearing doesn't fit, so he has to wear a shitty COVID mouth mask.
Yeah. There's also Mathieu's bizarre headscarf thing he's got going on to not affect his hair. But yes, a full-on palette swap for most of the cast here. I just like fun, weird, mechanical stuff. You could have had all of this happen off-screen, but it's just cool to see them doing stuff like this. Again, it adds to the sense of depth that you get from the world here. But anyway, this episode kicks off for real with a proud Eureka 7 tradition.
Reset the counter.
Yep. Another scene that happens while somebody's pissing.
Yep.
In this case, Renton is pissing off a ledge, and an angry old man comes and shouts at him for pissing. I can't put it any more simply than that, but that is what happens.
That's quite literally what happens.
Yes. So this is, in a neat little bit of continuity, this is the lone digger that Talho and Holland heard while they were arguing last episode. He identifies himself as a Mr. Brittany. He is upset about Renton harming the scub. It's not entirely clear what the scub is, but it's something that shouldn't be pissed on, apparently.
And it is also something that has something to do with trapar ways, right? I think Holland mentions that in a bit of dialogue.
Yeah, and Brittany himself also mentions that he thinks that the scub is still quote-unquote kicking, and that he can mine thousands of gallons of trapar out of it. Now, I was not aware trapar was a substance that could be mined, but apparently it is. This sort of ties into the thing we learned last episode, which is that they just grow LFOs in the ground, apparently.
Right.
Yep.
Which we'll get into later. I've written here, both of these episodes are my favourite kind of episodes, which is the hero meets a lonely weirdo character of the week. And let's talk, because again, we spoke about it when we were talking about the last episode, but this episode really is kind of an echo of that episode, right? Like,
yeah,
they're both about sort of lonely, isolated men who have given up on their weird dream to a certain extent, right?
Well, I think there is a bit of a contrast there, because, Brittany, in some ways, has not given up, right? In some ways, he has given up everything else for the sake of a dream. Right?
I would say that the events of the back half of the episode prove that he has in fact given up on the dream.
Yes.
Right?
I think that is the reveal, right? And that is sort of the moral difference between Neil and Brittany, right? And it kind of adds to the bittersweetness, because as we kind of see here, Renton, what does he say? Renton knows how to deal with crotchety old men.
Yes.
I'm
used to dealing with stubborn old men.
And so strikes up a pretty natural friendship of sorts with Brittany.
Yeah.
It makes for a nice contrast, right? Because last episode we had a man who had seemingly given up on his dream, who was able to sort of relive that dream.
He recaptured it for a day.
Right, recaptured that energy, right? Whereas here we have a man who seemingly still has a big dream and therefore is sympathetic to Renton, whereas Renton has a rather low opinion of Neil initially. But then in the end it shows how that dedication to that dream has sort of corrupted him in a tragic way, right?
Yeah, I think you've captured the essence of the relationship between these two episodes and the opposite arcs. You're absolutely right. Neil starts off having let the dream go, and even though it's only temporary, he does sort of get it back at the end, whereas Brittany appears to be fanatically dedicated to his dream, but maybe he's fanatically dedicated to something else instead.
Yes.
Couple of notes here. I think that a really great detail here is that Brittany opens the can and then eats the food straight off the can opener, which is
unprecedented level of shitty old man.
That is truly some next level shit, because look, eating straight out of the can. Who amongst us has not entertained or considered it? But with the can opener, that is just
the sheer level of no fucks given. There is
that is you are truly fully gone. You are.
And there are indications, there are cans and trash scattered around all over the place. You get the impression that this guy has sort of fallen off the edge of civilization, right? He's not even maintaining human habits for his own benefit. He's just sort of fully gone native almost there.
He's been here for a very long time. I think this is also what sort of leads Renton to conclude that he abandoned his family, right?
Yeah, which is never explicitly stated, but I mean, I think a lot of the motivation in this episode is not explicitly stated, and that kind of makes it stronger because you're left to fill in the gaps yourself.
It's never explicitly acknowledged that the man in the picture is his son, for example.
No,
that is just sort of what Renton concludes, and it turns out to be true. Right?
Yeah, I was going to say, we're never explicitly told it's true, but from the way it hits, I think it's fairly safe to say that it was. And, you know, there's a lot of things left unsaid about Brittany, right? Like, why is he so obsessed with finding LFOs? You know, why is he so obsessed with doing something that his son can be proud of? You know, clearly he is trying to recapture something, right? He's trying to recapture a past glory and an echo of what they used to have. But it's never stated what happened to his son. Why did they fall out or something like that? Why is he so desperate to recapture that glory?
Right.
And in a strange way, you know, like I said, because it lets you fill in the blanks yourself, that sort of it sort of deepens the tragedy to a certain extent.
And I think this all kind of ties together thematically, right? Like what we were talking about last episode of like what people are kind of choosing to do towards as we maybe look the end of the world in the eye on the horizon, right? Because this is also the episode where like, you know, Brittany shows Renton the buried LFOs. Right?
Yes.
So we get to actually see them, you know.
Yeah, and it's a pretty striking visual, honestly.
Yes. Yeah. But they're dying, right? Like they are not they're not being harvested. These ones, like they're for whatever reason, they're no good for how people use LFOs in this world, right?
And you can see it, you know, as we look at them, you can see they're sort of melting, they're sort of rotting from the inside out, all that kind of stuff. You know, so again, just sort of adding to that feeling of a world that was once vibrant that is now sort of passing by there.
I think there's two interesting things to notice here. The first one being how this ties into the themes of the show as a whole. You know, we once again have a story about, well, legacy, right? What does it mean, or what responsibilities do you have to the people who are looking up to you? What role or what precedent do you need to set for those who will step into your footsteps? Like what Brittany has going on with his son is very much a kind of dark reflection of what Renton has towards his dad, or what he has towards Holland, or what Holland has towards Renton. Even though that isn't brought up as much in the show, it is very much or in the episode, it is very much a spin on the same sort of idea.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why Renton does strike up a friendship with Brittany, right? Because Brittany talks about Axel Thurston, right? Like, as Renton puts it, this is the first time anybody's ever acknowledged his grandfather instead of his father, right? And how, like, despite the, well, not even content, it's just the natural relationship a kid is going to have with their, with their parental figure, but like, it fills Renton with pride, right? He's proud of the idea that like people out there know his grandpa, right? Like the person he actually has a true familial connection with.
Yeah.
And, I guess speaking of legacies, right? It's just like in a lot of ways, right? It's like nobody can shut up about Adrock Thurston, right? Like, of course, right? The hero who saved the world, right? Everybody lives in, not just Renton, the world lives under the shadow of Adrock Thurston.
I mean, we just had an episode about Yucatan coasting off of Adrock's fame, right?
So I think it's like there's a reason why, like, I think, to speak to like legacy, why Renton, like, in a lot of ways, like, initially like gels so well with Brittany is like, oh, you know my grandpa, oh, okay, like you're not like everybody else, almost, right?
I think of it more as a like, oh, I'm so happy to finally meet someone who's a fan of Keanu Reeves' music as opposed to his acting.
Wow, that's harsh.
I think it's a little harsh to old Axel Thurston here. I feel
I think everything you guys have said about that is absolutely spot on. I think there's another reason which that Renton is attracted to Brittany, which is the sense that they both have determination to see through their unfinished business. Right, like they both. At one point, Renton says, "I can't go home yet," and Brittany says, "Same here." right? And they are both struggling to find something to make themselves greater. Right, for Renton, it's to escape the shadow of his father, to please his grandfather, and for Brittany, it's to reconnect with his son. For whatever reason that is there.
I mean, because Brittany can also offer Renton that because he doesn't get it from the Gecko State, right? Because the Gecko State are like notoriously unambitious. They have no real goals aside from making money and catching waves, right? So
calling them unambitious might be a little harsh, but I get what you mean. They are not.
They're not driven by a singular vision the way Renton is sort of looking for.
They are take life as it comes people there, But we also get a little bit of a hint here, which is that although Brittany has been very aggressively spurning the Gecko State's offers for help, he did steal their bread.
He is stealing their food. Yeah.
And,
I don't know what you're talking about. It was just lying there.
Yes, indeed. I think the shot of the bread with a padlock on it is very funny.
Hey, if Renton can just walk into a guy's home because the door was just open, he can take that bread because it was just lying there.
Fair, I suppose. Yes. But it's kind of like a double piece of characterization, right? In the moment, we take him taking the bread as a humanizing touch because it shows that he does want to, he does want the food. He is still human in that regard, and it's used as a bonding moment because Renton doesn't rat him out. Renton just kind of like accepts the obvious lie, and so it humanizes him. But in retrospect, it's also perhaps an indication that perhaps he has a slightly loose sense of morals as well.
Yes.
Even if he will not admit it there. Right. A couple of other notes about these scenes. We again see that Renton is surprisingly good with mechanics and repairs, despite what his grandfather says and what he tells himself. He's able to fix his clock, no problem, and fixing clocks is not easy for the most part.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know how much experience Renton has fixing clocks, or if he was able to just do that entirely by intuition.
Yeah, I don't want to, because we alluded to it earlier, but I don't want to skip over the scene where Eureka gets angry and snaps at the children, because I think it's really important. This is the first time we've seen Eureka angry basically ever. Right.
Well, there was also the part where she slapped Mater in that one episode.
Yeah, there was that.
Right, but that was kind of a very sort of cold, dispassionate anger.
I know what you mean, though. Yes, this is Eureka lashing out in a way that she has not up till now.
Yeah, she is. If you look at her expression, her action, she is in pain in a way that we have not seen her before. And to her credit, she realizes it's so out of character that she immediately goes to see Misha and submit herself to a bunch of medical checks. I
do like how that episode also shows the maturity of Hilda, who is able to quickly diffuse the situation by showing a bit more patience, which shows the difference in maturity between her and Eureka, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, it shows what we have known all along, really, is that Hilda is kind of like good-hearted, mature, good with the kids. Perhaps the most motherly, but in the most positive way, of all the characters on the Gecko State. We don't really get too much out of this aside from the revelation that Eureka is kind of deliberately living away from the Nervash, and it's the first time that she has ever done that.
Yes.
Nervash withdrawal.
We also see that Eureka is perhaps a little touchy-feely with Holland, and Talho is still not a big fan of that. She is. The answers she gives to Renton are very, I would say, clipped and minimal. She's not too happy about what's going on there. So again, just sort of digging up those old plot dynamics just to remind you that that this is still an ongoing concern in terms of the relationship between the characters. But another couple of notes here. It's obviously there to serve a plot purpose, but we see that Renton's pretty good with the Nervash. Like, he pulls this sick power slide, and
it's pretty
as
slick.
He's drifting.
I mean, again, I think like we gotta give credit where it's due. Renton has been pretty slick with the Nervash the last few episodes, right? You know, again, he during the prison break here, like he is definitely, and I think that's kind of the intended contrast, or the where the conflict is coming from, right? Is that like as Renton grows more confident piloting the Nervash, you know, as he grows more capable of doing it without Eureka. Right, and the ways in which that like affects Eureka's own perception of, again, like is her like psychic connection to the Nervash real, or is it more born from the sort of psychological dependency on like my value as a human being?
Yes,
at the risk from
stems from piloting the Nervash. That's all.
Yeah, because at the risk of setting G off, but is this the sports anime trope of like natural talent versus I worked so hard for this?
I don't. I don't think that is like, to be clear. I don't think that is what. I don't find that to be the subtext here. I think, the nature of like Renton's like talent piloting the Nervash. I mean, there's a lot of things going on here, right? There is the compact drive. There is, you know, the legacy of Adrock. You know, there are.
There may be literal space magic happening as well.
He sets off like 5 different chosen one flags.
I will say as well that the show has been pretty good about showing him steadily getting better.
Right. That's to be clear, right? He is improving, right? Like we are far removed from the days of him trying to protect Talho in the Denny's parking lot.
Also, just the whole like being good with machines automatically makes you a master engineer in every field and also a great pilot is a sci-fi trope as old as dirt. Look at Luke Skywalker, right?
But why do you think Amuro Ray was such a good pilot of the Gundam?
It's because he was a psychopath, obviously.
No, it's because he read the instruction manual. He is the only one who read the instruction manual.
But the point is, like this scene is very deliberately intended to show that Renton has gotten very good with the Nervash. You know, I think it is a deliberate piece of storytelling because its primary narrative purpose is to let Brittany see the Nervash, right?
Right, exactly.
I think there is a very deliberate secondary function there to show you that, hey, Renton's pretty good with this thing now. And in fact, I think we get a callback to that at the end of the episode, but we'll get there when we get there. We do also get a quick reminder here that the Nervash is the oldest LFO in the world, which again is something we know, but again, you know, just kind of bringing up an old plot point just to sort of reinforce it.
As we all know, oldest is the strongest.
Yeah,
that's how mechs work.
Yeah.
So before
technology works.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I said earlier that there were 2 things I wanted to say, and now maybe the good time to bring up the second thing, which is in that scene when they discover, you know, the ancient LFOs hanging from the ceiling. Renton does not seem to be very shocked by the fact that the robots grow in caves. So does he already know this, or what's going on there?
The implication is that everybody knows it, right? It is an accepted fact of the world. It is only surprising to us because that information was deliberately withheld from us until a few episodes ago.
Because that's not usually how the show does things, right? Because we usually have Renton being the like naive, gullible idiot who doesn't know anything about the world, and we learn things about the world as he does.
Right, and I think this is a deliberate case to subvert that because obviously because it is effective to shock the viewer, but also because it wouldn't make any sense in context for Renton not to know that because his father discovered the Type 0.
Right.
One of the reasons Adrock is famous is that he discovered the Type 0, and you would assume that Renton would at least have a basic working knowledge of both that and also as a mechanic where LFOs come from and how they're made.
That's fair.
So I think that it's deliberate to withhold it from the viewer, but it doesn't necessarily break the idea that Renton is the viewpoint character.
Don't worry, there are much weirder questions to ask about, okay, if they mine LFOs out of the ground, how does one maintain and repair an LFO, and why do they bleed blood?
I mean, this is also like, are the KLFs that the army uses, are they also LFOs, or are they like mass production models?
No, they're LFOs. KLF is just a specific term for them.
It's not like how a Zaku is not a Gundam.
Yes.
But they're both mechs.
It's a difference between what you can call something a Zaku, but a Zaku or a mobile suit, right? Like all mechs in Gundam are mobile suits, but a Zaku is a specific mobile suit.
Not true. Some of them are mobile armors.
Oh, it's all right.
Yes, but yeah, I mean, G is roughly correct, right? Like the KLFs are just a different type of LFO, but they are all LFOs. You know, there is no indication that the KLFs are anything other than bog standard LFOs.
An LFO is just a mech in this universe.
Basically. You know, you can
mine out of the ground.
I can't even remember what LFO stands for off the top of my head, but you can just
large
say
flying object, I think. No, I'm serious.
Oh, okay. Like you might be right. No. I know.
I honestly do not remember. I'll put it in the show notes.
So long, yeah.
But the point is, it doesn't matter for all intents and purposes. You could just say the robot. It's fine, you know. But where was I? What were we going to say there? Anyway, yes. Let's get on to the meat of this episode. But firstly, there is a good little scene where Eureka accompanies Renton to bring food to Brittany, and Renton really wants to do the right thing.
Yes,
but he just doesn't know how.
Yeah, I mean, this guy can't keep eating canned slop. He needs some, freshly homemade slop.
Right, he needs what do they call it? Thin soup.
Yeah.
You're just like gotta be the most depressing words put together for a meal.
That's some real Oliver Twist stuff.
I mean, this is the ice soup meme that was popular a couple of years ago.
Yeah. But I think this scene is important just because it shows that it's just a reminder that Renton is trying to help Eureka. He just doesn't know how to go about it because he's bad at interacting with Eureka, he's bad at interacting with girls, and he's bad at interacting with people in general.
Right, and as we kind of find out, right, I think both Eureka and that is the on the meta level, right? The as the viewers going, why won't they just make up and talk to each other, right? It's the thing that is frustrating about it is that I think both Eureka and Renton want the same thing. They want to reach a sort of mutual understanding of each other's positions, and they want to they are both willing to give and take what is necessary to find that equal ground, but neither are equipped with the knowledge or vocabulary or emotional maturity to quite pull it off, right?
Right. They are emotionally immature,
Yes.
in different ways, though. Eureka is emotionally immature because she was raised as a living weapon and has no understanding of human emotion. And Renton is immature because he has been sheltered from the world and he is a child. Right. So they both have the same problem through different means. But the intent is there. They do want to reach out to each other.
And then we find out this shitty old man kind of sucks, actually.
I really like this scene where Renton just wanders into the hold and he's just trying to chisel the cockpit open.
Oh, no!
It's the equivalent of walking into your driveway and finding a dude trying to Slim Jim your window.
Trying to Slim Jim your fucking Abrams tank or something.
Yeah, it's so goofy, and then he just pulls the gun straight away. I think
he's strapped.
It's a really good piece of characterization, or just one of those incidental details, that he also has a really old-fashioned gun, right? It's a long-nosed, single-action revolver, and that's just kind of a really nice dovetailing of character and aesthetic there. It turns out that Brittany thinks if he can't find an LFO, perhaps his son will approve of him bringing back the world's oldest and most famous LFO instead, even if he has to kidnap the pilot and hijack the robot.
And we kind of find out that there's all sort of a worst possible scenario. Everything's colliding at once because at the same time, the military is performing, I guess, what seems like routine patrols of the FACs.
Yeah, they're just sweeping through all the old mines there. And Holland is just well, we better not let them find us. And at the same time, Renton is going hell for leather across the landscape at gunpoint. Another example of the Nirvash's weird cockpit design here, where Renton and Brittany can sit in separate cockpits, but he can still poke a gun through the middle to threaten him.
Yeah, this is very much one of those this is Eureka 7's God, what was that joke we were making about Apothecary Diaries? A complex bathhouse 20 feet off camera the whole time.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, except that this has been a weird design quirk all the way from the beginning, right? Like the first couple of episodes revolve around the fact that Renton can fall into the other cockpit but still plug the compact drive in because it sits in the middle of this weird cubby between the two cockpits.
Yeah,
It's
but just like I can't remember
weird.
the last time they actually like came up that yes, like technically the two cockpits are like open air or like there's a connective like hallway.
Very, very weird. And then the military see Renton roll in. They hate him.
I hate him.
And they decide to pull him over.
Get out of the stolen vehicle. Only we are allowed to steal that vehicle.
Yes.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. And Renton responds by kicking their asses.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And this is what I was talking about earlier when I said that, like, you know, they're seeding the idea that he's getting really good with this, but he just takes out those first two dudes like nothing. Like he takes them out with slickness.
Yeah, I mean, like he is. I again, you know, maybe this show will get into it later, right? But like he is taking these dudes out, you know, like he is.
Well,
like
the first
them.
guy escapes, right? We see him get out of the cockpit,
but like. You know what I mean? Like he's just blasting the cockpit of those other two.
Yeah, he smokes that second. And in fact, Holland has to intervene to stop him from smoking the third guy. Like Holland body checks him just when he's about to blow that third guy away.
Yeah.
There is the little implication though, because the Nerve Ash's pupils fade away when he gets body checked. That is just like part Renton, part the consciousness of the robot sort of going berserk, Ava style. Like,
yeah, it's always difficult to tell when you have these like nebulously alive robots, right? I think my impression has always been that the Nerve Ash's eyes going are kind of like a sign that the machine and the pilot are in sync, right? But I think, you know, certainly there is a slickness to these moves which indicate that Renton is pretty in control of the situation, honestly. Even if the others hadn't shown up, he would have been fine.
Renton would have been
perhaps
fine,
fine.
Maybe, yes. I mean, I don't think the body, like, I mean, the way I read it is because, let's be clear, I don't think Holland has any, like, you know, that or like an anti-killing. I think it's more, I mean, the read I had is that they needed one of the KLFs intact to read the radio. Right, because that's what they immediately do. They check the radio to see did they get the message out, and unfortunately, the answer is yes. The military is now aware that Gecko State is here.
There's also possibly the pragmatic consideration that blowing up a robot tends to produce quite a lot of traces that you can monitor.
Right, and killing cops gets more attention on you than merely fighting them off. I guess.
Well, I mean, there's already one dead cop. What's one more, right? But and then you get the good bit where. Again, it's whenever I see scenes like these, I can't tell. Is this because Japan is not like a gun culture, or is this more meant to like tell you that like Brittany is not? He is not a trade killer, right? He is not a soldier.
I mean,
right?
To be clear, you're talking about the fact that Holland immediately notices that the safety is still on, right?
Well, it's a revolver. Like,
I mean, all weapons have safeties, but.
Revolvers actually often don't.
Really?
So,
okay.
Yes, that is a
I've never fired a revolver, I must admit. So
I mean, it might have been a bluff by Holland.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Is I think it was probably closer to a bluff because
I don't think they were thinking that hard about it. You know, I think the idea is to show it's twofold, right? It's to show that Brittany is not actually very experienced with using the weapon, but also it's to show that Holland recognizes there is no threat in a way that Renton is far too inexperienced and naive to notice.
But you know, this all kind of leads to reset the clock. Like how many days since Holland assaulted a child?
Yeah, how many days since Renton has had his dreams shattered? I will note here quickly. They just maroon Brittany in the middle of the desert.
Oh yeah,
they just leave him there.
Yeah, I mean, like as Holland says, like. Yeah, there's no point in killing you now, but we're not going to help you.
And to be clear, the military will probably be along to pick him up and throw him in jail at some point. But yeah, it's a pretty rough way to kind of end his involvement in the episode there. And
Like the thing is also there is not even like the shimmer of redemption, right? It's just this guy, betrayed us. Fuck him.
Yes.
Like
I mean, it's kind of similar to like the run-ins with like Yucatan Iglesias, right? It's like there's these. Like, there's this feeling, there's almost a sentiment, right, that, like, adults are in control of their own actions, and thus adults are responsible for their own consequences.
Right. But at least Yucatan gets to, at least Yucatan got to redeem himself in the end, right? Sort of.
Sort of, yeah.
Like,
I think that is because A, it's a chronologically earlier thing, and B, he is a family member, and it's much harder to persuade people that family members are irredeemable monsters, for better or worse. But this fits in the general pattern we've seen of people consistently failing to live up to Renton's expectations of them, right? Like this is one of the most bitter blows yet, because
for sure,
unlike people he has admired from afar, this is someone who Renton reached out to with kindness, and they bonded over their shared experience, their shared life, their shared goals. And then that person turned around and stabbed him brutally in the back.
Right. And well, speaking of broken pedestals here, like, how do you guys choose to read like Holland's? I think in many ways outsized reaction to all of this, right? Because I think at least as a kid, I remember thinking, man, Holland, like this is real. Like, I mean, obviously the first time Holland hits Renton, I went, I don't know, this Holland dude is kind of a dick. But I think this was the episode I recall watching where I really, really turned on Holland. I was like, oh, like Holland is a broken person, right? Because
the thing I took from this is that Holland is taking his anger at Brittany's betrayal and his anger at the fact that the military now know where they are, and venting it immaturely on Renton, who every other member of the Gecko State understands that Renton is not to blame for this. He was taken at gunpoint. He was literally held hostage. But Holland is just so immature and so frustrated that he demands an outlet for his anger, and since they just abandoned that dude in the desert, the only person left to blame is Renton.
I think I'm pretty much on the same page there. It just shows that Holland is not just comically immature, like when we get Dirtbag Holland. It just shows that he is completely maladjusted.
Yeah,
like,
he is actually a disturbed individual, to be honest. Maybe disturbed is a bit pejorative, but he clearly has issues.
Well, disturbed, you say, right?
Thank you.
No, we're not at that episode. Yeah, actually, I don't know. No. I don't think there's a single episode with that title, but no, it's like the fact that like even the rest of Gecko State, again, we have been joking about Gecko State's bohemian lack of direction, and they are all almost like unilaterally unified in, dude, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like,
I mean, Talho calls out Holland to his face on it. What the hell?
Beacon of maturity and benign treatment of children. Talho is calling out.
Well, I mean, this is just really showing you like why, like where and how Talho is basically just Eureka 7's Misato, right? Like very immature on the surface, but clearly like has at least a better handling of her own emotional state than
right. And this sort of is again another echo of what we saw last episode, the idea that in fact Talho, for all her bitchiness and all her shallowness and all her sort of childishness, is actually a more responsible and mature person than Holland.
Talho is ready to confront the ghosts of her past. Like, she is locked and loaded. Like, she is like, every conversation she has with Holland is like, hey, I'm ready to confront the ghosts of our past. Just give me the word.
It's some real, do you want to go fight the final boss now energy? How about now? How about now? Stuff. But
Holland is like, no, I need to get a high score on the racing minigame first.
But, pretty much perfect, yes. But and we end this episode on a very somber note, really. Right. I mean, Renton says the key thing, which is, what did he want his son to say when he showed off the Navash? What? Because even Renton understands that if
we
he
live in a society.
Yes, we live in a society. But even if he had succeeded, even if he had brought the Navash back to his son, what was his son going to say? His son wasn't going to say, "Congratulations, you threatened a child and stole a robot. That's great."
Welcome home, Dad.
Yeah, this was always a pointless endeavor. Brittany was blinded by his obsession, by his inferiority complex. He was blinded by his desperation to be someone, and in the end, it was all pointless. And that's
specifically how these revelations relate to like Renton's own relationship with his family and his legacy, right? Because he ties like the whole like, why was Brittany even in like on this pointless quest? Wait a minute, why did I get the Omni to drive? Like, what did Dad even want me to do with this?
And this is kind of the looping around of the conversation we had earlier, where Renton connects them together as people who are on a quest to find their purpose, right? And what he understandably takes from this is, actually, Brittany's quest led him to desperation and obsession and madness and ultimately to losing everything. And so what does that make me?
Mm-hmm.
And this is some really bad timing because
right
at that precise moment, Eureka comes up to his door and she's like, Renton, I thought about a bit and maybe you are better with the Navash. Maybe you should do all the stuff. And it is very hard to interpret this as anything other than a desperate cry for help. Right, like it is a pleading for reconciliation, for support, for anything.
Right, but unfortunately, it is timed. Yes, in Renton's lowest moment when he does not have remotely the emotional capacity to reciprocate. Right.
Yeah, and I think the way he acts here, it's selfish, but it's understandable, and it's childish. But he is a child. It is proof, I think, we've talked a lot in these two episodes about how Renton has grown a great deal in many ways, but he has not yet become a person who can support Eureka in the way that she needs.
He's not there yet.
Yeah, and that's ultimately, the quest he is on, right? The thing he wants to do is support Eureka in the way that only he can, and it's very clear here that he's not there yet.
It's sort of amazing how this episode takes a plunge starting from like, haha, old man gets mad at Renton for pissing.
Yes.
All the way down to like,
my hopes and dreams are gone forever.
Yeah. My smile is gone for good.
Tumbling down.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's really good writing. I think that it is, they take this kind of like caricatured, get off my lawn, grumpy old man and turn him into this genuinely tragic figure with just a few scenes there. And again, it works so well as a pair with the previous episode because it does contrast, this is the dark side of that, that specialization, that obsession, that kind of keep growing towards your goal. In that episode, Renton was sort of uneasy but inspired by Neil, but Brittany is kind of like the dark reflection of where that can take you.
Neil was the man we got out of his spiral, and Brittany is the man of whom we didn't even know that he had already drowned in the spiral, right?
Exactly. Great episode. I think this is a great episode. I didn't remember it beforehand, but I think it's really, really
definitely a strong episode. That how you feeling about that Shonen Heart OP playing at the start of the
this episode perhaps the first and certainly the most marked so far of the extreme mood disparity between the ending of the episode and the extremely upbeat ED here.
Extreme Ijo Yujo energy.
Right, that is to be clear, that's a Fly Away, but
Fly Away, yes. But yes,
the ED is also very...
but do we have anything else we want to say about this episode or indeed this pair of episodes generally?
You guys watch the next episode preview?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Next episode, the world's largest jelly baby.
Would you still love me if I were a slime?
We got some
stuff is about to happen. You might remember, Aqua. I mentioned a few episodes ago that you can generally tell when weird shit is about to happen, and you can tell because those episodes are called Experience 2, which is our next episode. Next time we will be watching episode 19, Experience 2, and episode 20, Substance Abuse. 2 titles which promise good times.
I hope Renton's going to develop a crippling heroin addiction because of the revelations of this episode.
Well, we'll see.
Eureka 7 takes on the opioid crisis. Let's see if Shinichiro Watanabe's protege Dai Sato can handle it any better than he could in Lazarus.
Topical joke. Anyway, all that remains is for me to say thank you very much, Aqua.
Thank you.
Thank you as always, G.
Always glad to be on.
And to encourage you all to, if you liked the episode or if you want to call us out on something, please leave us a like, leave us a comment. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, Stitcher, on YouTube, of course. And we will see you next time.